Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another weekend virtual workshop. It's so wonderful to have you joining us today. Thank you for making the time and honoring yourselves and your business to be a part of today's workshop. My name is Carrie Ramsey, and I'm the project manager for the We Can project, which is funded by FedDev Ontario through the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy Ecosystem Fund and is led by Queen's University. So many of you have joined us before. Welcome back. It's great to have you joining us. And I can see that we have some more joining us now in the waiting room. I will just mention that although there may be people that have joined us before, there are certainly some new faces, and we want to say welcome to you. Don't feel like you're a stranger. We'd love for you to take an opportunity right now in the Zoom chat to let us know who you are. And even if you've been here for the previous 50 plus virtual workshops that we have hosted, we hope that you'll take this opportunity to join in and let people know once again what area of the world you are connecting from, and let us know if you have a business. This is primarily a group of business women that tend to be in these events. So let us know the name of your business, if you have a link or an Instagram link, whatever you'd like to share there. We would love to connect with you and learn a bit more about you and your business. While you're taking a moment to do that, as I always do, I'd love to take this moment to acknowledge that I'm connecting to this workshop from the Bay of Quinte region, which is the traditional hunting, gathering, and fishing territory of the Huron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. And as some of you may know, yesterday, May 5th, was actually and I'm going to make sure I get this right, the National Day of Awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada and the United States. And it's absolutely heartbreaking that we even have to have a national day that recognizes, the missing and murdered Indigenous women on Turtle Island, really is what it's known as. And you know what, I hope that you had a moment yesterday to pause and reflect, but honestly, that we don't forget those women even today and the days that come after. That day, by the way, it has been around for 11 years now. It has been recognized, and it was actually started by a Métis artist named Jamie Black, who created an installation of red dresses. So it's also known as Red Dress Day. And so that symbol of the red dress really is connected to the National Day of Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women throughout Canada and the United States. So I do want to mention that. I know it's a somber occasion, but actually today's topic itself is based in, considering the grief and considering hard seasons in our lives. And so today I want to first of all applaud you all for having the courage to come to this workshop. And I know for some of you, you're here for others that you know who have a business perhaps and who are struggling through this very difficult time. What's been, termed as certainly unprecedented in our global history. But I'm so grateful that Ophelia is here today. She is our presenter, and she is going to be talking to us today about managing our businesses through grief. And there are some tools she's going to provide and some experiences I'm sure she'll share that will be invaluable to all of us. So thank you so much, Ophelia, for joining us. Thank you to all of you in the call today as well for joining us. Today's session is being recorded. So if you would like to have a copy of the recording, I will put my email into the Zoom chat so that you're able to get a copy of that later. As well, I'll mention and would like to welcome our two ASL interpreters today, Janice and Renee. And I'll put this note in the Zoom chat as well. But if anyone would like to pin them to the top of your screen to follow along, you can click on the three dots that are on their photo and they can be pinned to the top of your screen. I will, as we go, be taking questions in the Zoom chat if I can help. But remember, there will be a Q&A session at the end of this workshop, which will not be recorded. So we'll pause the recording at that time just for privacy purposes and to allow people to ask questions openly and freely. I believe that's all that I wanted to cover this morning. Any other notes I will put into the Zoom chat. Thank you so much for joining us. And Ophelia, it is a pleasure and an honor to have you with us today. I will give you the virtual floor. Welcome.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. And I'm honored that we are all here today as human beings to talk about this topic, because at times this topic can feel overwhelming. It can feel that I don't want to talk about it. And what I find is when we were thinking about our businesses, a lot of people were thinking of loss, but they were thinking more of a loss as revenue and maybe as a storefront. But there's the grief because as entrepreneurs, we know that our business is like our child. It's we've birthed the dream, we've birthed the vision, and then all of a sudden, this was changed in a way we didn't expect. For some of us, it was the physical locations was closed. And this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the experience and what it is. We're going to talk about some definitions and move through it. If you have any questions that's urgent, please put it in the chat. This is an intimate conversation. I don't have to go from one slide to the next. I'm not that type of a facilitator. I want you to really feel if you need a question answered to put it in the chat. So let's begin. At the end of the day, we want things to go back to normal. I want to be able to go into a coffee shop. I don't even drink coffee or like coffee, but I want to go into a coffee shop and have a coffee date with people outside of my bubble. I think even now I'll be happy with strangers. I want things to go back to normal. But what is normal, right? What is normal? I think the thing about grief is that we can never go back. We can go through, we can move forward, but we want some aspects that helps us to feel, okay, this experience is over. COVID has brought a lot of additional stresses. And our life still had stresses before, but it's this stress of working from home if you have a child. And I have a little one, so it's that little bit of reminder. So if you hear a little voice in the background, that's her. It's the idea that we can't go to concerts anymore. We can't gather in large gatherings. Even those things that might have frustrated you, getting up early in the morning and taking your kids to hockey or a soccer game. Some parents might have thought, oh, I wish we never had to do this anymore. And now you wish you could do this, So it's things like that. And then it's the constant bombardment of COVID information. You can't really, unless you're living in the wild country, you are hearing it all the time. So these additional stressors are naturally and expectedly weighing on us. I want to talk about these three words that we hear a lot: bereavement, grief, and mourning. And sometimes people use them interchangeably, but they have a different meaning. Bereavement, and we hear this a lot in the workplace. We're going to give them bereavement periods. They have 3 days to bereave, or if it's, depending on your company, if you have a policy, this is the actual time. There's no specific time that you're allowed to grieve, but when we hear this word, it tends to be related to insurance and health plans and companies and workplaces. So that is about the time of grief and mourning after a loss. And then we hear the word mourning. Mourning is actually the outward expression of grief. It's what we see that's happening. So it's going to a funeral, it's lighting a candle, it's the cultural experience that happens, right? It's creating an altar. It depends what it is that how your community mourns, how your family mourns. That is the outward expression of grief. It's basically what we see when somebody has a grief experience. But grief is the emotional and internal experience that happens inside of us. It's how we feel. It's what's going on inside. And you put that all together, that is what's happening right now. So if we layer this over with the COVID pandemic, we are in a bereavement period for over a year. Actually, it started in 2019, around November, December, when it started to come out in the news. That's why it's called COVID-19, because it's from 2019. And now we're in 2021. So we're still in that bereavement period. The mourning, and we'll talk a little bit about that, is the outward expression of that. And we really haven't had an opportunity to even go to, we haven't had experience as a community to mourn, right? We haven't had a community like getting together at City Hall where we can light a candle and remember. We haven't had that. And that's part of the stress, because we haven't had something that's an outward expression that we can say, this is it. There hasn't been that. And the internal is what we're feeling inside, which we'll talk a little bit more about. Grief is universal. Everyone experienced grief. And especially if we're talking about the pandemic, you just have to turn on the news to see that every country is experiencing grief and loss. Grief can affect our emotions, our thoughts, our behavior, and even how we feel physically. There's a concept that's called grief brain. And what that is the sense of confusion. You can't remember things because it's so overwhelming, right? And the way I experience grief and the way you experience grief, it's totally different. But there's something universal, but yet it's very individual. And it's individual by culture, it's individual by community, and it's even individual within each individual in a family. So for instance, my sister and I both experienced grief at the loss of our mother 12 years ago. How we experience it is totally different. We both lost a mother, but she was much younger than me. And how I interpret it is different because our experience with our mother was different. And it also depends on your age. So if someone has mother died when they were really young, they are not only mourning the death of their mother, but as they turn 16, my mom is not there for my sweet 16th birthday. My mom is not there when I graduate. So even within a family where you think, well, you both lost a mother, it's different. Okay. So as I said, grief is universal, but remember, it's so individual. And as a business person, as a business owner, even if you have the same business as your next door neighbor has a business, you will experience it differently. So before you think about grief, one of the things I like to talk to people about is, what do you think about grief and loss? Right? And this is something, if you want to put some thoughts in the chat, that's totally up to you. And Carrie can let me know. But these are questions before we even get through it. It's important to find out where you are when you're thinking about grief and loss, because it's an inevitable part of life. There's a saying that I always say, grief is the price of love. We love someone. And as we know, I don't want to be morbid, but we all have an endpoint. My mom used to say, we were born to die. And in that time, we need to live, right? So we want to live as long as we can, and we want to be healthy. But the other side of loving is that you might experience grief because that person might die before you. And we rarely discuss our feelings with our business colleagues or within business because we're told that that needs to stay separate. But before you consider a business strategy for help you with grief and loss, you need to look internal, because as I said before, grief infects us internally. So what are your experiences with grief? What is your background and what are your thoughts? Because this will have a great impact on how you create a business strategy to help you with grief and loss. To say that I want to have something that if I have a grief episode within my business, I have a plan. And if it's a solo entrepreneur, it can be very simple. So what happens, God forbids that something tragic happens in your family. Do you have a plan in place? Who's going to take over your social media accounts? And it can be something really simple, like it's going to be my business partner, or it's going to be, I'm going to have somebody that's going to do, or if it's you, when we are in a good place, that's the time to make plans on something that's difficult. Right. So that's the whole point that I hope that this workshop reminds you. This can be a good place to start making some simple steps. And knowing these things before I continue, it's really important, because if you have experiences with it, if you have any background, maybe have some training as a counselor or a coach, or just your personal experience of having gone through a grief, that is important, because all those experiences from our past can help us handle something in the future, even though that each grief episode is individual. So these are just some questions that I thought we would consider before we go through, because sometimes a lot of people ask me, these are the most popular ones. Grief can be fixed with drug therapy and or cured with psychotherapy. So if you think this is true, let me know in the chat. I'll just go through.
Mostly falses, Ophelia.
All right. You guys get all A's. It's true. It cannot be fixed. It can help, because grief is not a mental health issue. It's an emotional experience. Sorry, I'm just going to move over my thing there. Rebuilding assumptions about the world and reconstructing meaning are essential components of adapting to a loss. What do you think? True or false?
So there's a mixture of answers on this one.
Okay. So this is true. When how I experienced grief 12 years ago, and when my mother died, and how I'm experiencing grief and loss today, is because I rebuilt my assumptions of what grief was. My assumptions of grief 10 years, 5, 7 years ago was that I was going to get over it, because that's what people told me. My assumptions came from what people told me after my mother died. And as I reconstructed meaning for my life, reconstructing meaning and finding a way to have meaning, as much as it's difficult and might not having now, but finding a way to reconstruct the meaning of what's happening right now individually or in your business, is how we rebuild and we move through the world. Number 3, frequent moves, estrangement, and geological separation from family members can adversely affect the grieving process.
I think everything one says true so far.
Okay, so true. The best thing that I like to say is when I'm working with someone in an individually is that if you can stay still and not make any major changes as you're going through this, unless the connection with family members is bringing up violence or it's unsafe, if you can stay in one place, because all of these bring another grief and it's all takes a lot of stresses. So the more that you have a routine helps with you to reconstruct that meaning. And the last question, we are permanently changed by grief. Some become impaired, others stronger and wiser.
Some say true, some say depends.
It is we are permanently changed by, I would say, every grief that we experience. And that the answer is true. And it can be depend for that person or persons that says depend, maybe because of the grief. But if we're talking about a really deep grief or something impactful, as much as we think that we're not changed, we are permanently changed. And the change can be, a grief can impair somebody. It can be so wounding that they may not be able to recover or become resilient like how they used to be, right? And we see that with some parents who've lost children. Others find a way to find strength, and some people find some wisdom. So grief changes you because at the end of the day, we're always changing. Every day we're changing. Every day we're having a transition. The change may not be positive, but grief, it's an emotional expression of how you're grieving, and every day we change. So thank you for participating. And the last one, time heals all wounds. That our favorite saying. So this one, I'm going to say that, let's see what some of the answers are here.
I'm seeing a lot of false, not all wounds. What you do with the time matters.
Whoever said that, yes, that's the answer. It's a saying that a lot of people say, oh, I remember, oh, just give it time, Ophelia, you'll get over it. Just give it time. My example about this, and this is false, it's what you do in the time that can help you to heal. It's not just that in a year. And I remember for me, I thought, okay, in a year, I'm going to get over this. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be back to myself. And I waited a year, and everybody said that in a year, you're going to be better. And it wasn't. And I'm not going to swear, but there is a lot of swear words in my mind at that point. And so it's what we do in the time that can help us to heal. There are a lot of different types of grief. The most common one we think about is the death of a loved one, someone that's intimate to us, the death of a pet. And the death of a pet can be, and there's studies that show can be even more impactful because that pet could have been with you through a lot of different grief experience. My parents died. I had to move from a house, a divorce. And this beautiful pet has been with you for 10, 12, 14 years, and then they die. So you're grieving the loss of your furry family member, but also this sense of support of loyalty and unconditional love that helped you to get through it. The ending of a relationship, and that relationship can be a friendship, a long-time friendship, romantic, a divorce, losing your dreams, and life-changing or life-threatening illness. Now, losing your dreams can be really impactful as a business owner, because your dream was to have a business. And if the business changed, that is a grief. Your mind and your heart doesn't know the difference. But sometimes in society, we like to have I would call it a hierarchical grief. Well, my grief is at the top because my mother died. And your grief is that your store closed. That's not as important. But our emotions does not know the difference. Pain is pain. So I always say in classes when I'm doing groups, the first thing in class I talk about, there's no hierarchy of grief. We're experiencing it, and we're here to learn. And the loss of community, a sense of feeling, however you define community. It could be a cultural community, religious community, or a community of women who got together, and men in a sense of business. We are no longer doing that to the extent. We can have it, thank goodness we have Zoom or agile virtual means, but it's a sense of a human connection. And I want to talk a little bit about, as we talked about loss of connection, this particular grief, I have been researching during the pandemic, is what we are most feeling. The sense that even though I had a work colleague or a client that was annoying, I miss them. I miss the sense of connection. We're human beings and we miss that connection. And that's what we're really grieving through in the pandemic. It's the sense that we can't, at first we couldn't explain it, but then as research started to come out in 2020 and early in 2021, it's the sense of belonging. It's the sense of feeling safe with other people. It's the sense of communicating with people that get me, that I can have a conversation, that they can be there, that if I give them permission, they can tap me on the shoulder, that they can give me that hug. This is the biggest part of the grief that we are grieving. Also, part of this, it's the loss of rituals and routines. Maybe every Friday night you went out with your family to a favorite restaurant. It was loud and boisterous, but that's how you celebrated. We miss this. We miss seeing our famous restaurant owner that we've gone through for 20 years. And it's not the perfect place, but it's our place. And that's what we're missing. The rituals, cultural rituals are not happening. We hear communities that can't do the celebration that they normally would. Maybe it was 3 or 4 days. If somebody died, they can't do that. So we have lost that sense of rituals, whatever that means. Funerals are totally different now. We can only have a certain amount of people. And people are experiencing funerals virtually. It's so, I went to a virtual funeral, and it's really odd that you're seeing people that you love virtually, and normally we could have given them a hug. The other grief that we're experiencing is a sense of vicarious grieving. It's this intense public exposure to death. It's creating additional mental health stresses. And as I said before, it's like we're looking into reviewing. Every time we turn on the TV or your news, you're viewing other people. You're viewing things that's happening in other countries. Currently, right now in India, we're viewing all of that heartache that's happening there. And if we have friends and family, they're experiencing that vicariously. And we're experiencing that vicariously as well, even though we may not have a connection to India, but we have a human connection. And as Carrie said earlier, we were discussing this. This is something that no matter where you go in the world, we can talk about. We went through this pandemic, and this is something that's happening. So you're viewing this. It's a viewing and experience that's happening not to you, but to other people, but you're feeling like it's happening to you. There's another grief that we call, which is ambiguous grieving. And ambiguous grieving is, it's a sense, I don't know what I feel. I'm not quite sure. In Trinidad, in my country, there's a saying called, I feel a how, when you're not know how you feel. It's like, I feel a how. And this is how I think about it. I don't know, but I'm feeling something. And a great example, this might be, if you have teenagers and they're more grumpy than usual, they're having ambiguous grief because they're missing the loss of graduation. You know, at that age, it's all about friends. It's all about groups. That's how they develop their sense of self, right? And further along what you have given them. This is ambiguous grieving because it's the sense of grief that's not recognized, but you can't really put it in a pocket. You can't really define it. It's ambiguous, just like the word. But a lot of youth are feeling this. They miss their friends or children. They just want to be back on their playground, right? So those are things, and you might be feeling this. Maybe you tell yourself, because of what's happening around, I'm so lucky. I'm able to pivot. I'm able to work at home. I have the technology. Our family can do it, but I'm still feeling sad. So you might hide that because you think, I don't want to share it because I feel so blessed, but I'm still feeling sad. I'm still struggling. That's ambiguous grief. And in some ways, it's disenfranchised grief because society doesn't want to recognize it. You're blessed, you know, you have your partner, you're living in a great home, your kids are fine, You can, whatever, but it's grieving. As I said, we grieve universally and individually. Your emotions doesn't care that you're able to have a nanny that lives in to help you. You're still grieving your regular routine. And we're going to talk now, get into the sense of business loss. So I want you to take this in. More than 50% of Canadian companies have lost at least 1/5 of their revenue due to the pandemic. And I know if I could, see all of you on my screen, but I know you're all shaking your head. As business owners, we've all lost revenue in some way or form. Well, I shouldn't say all. Some businesses have increased because of their businesses. So I said most of us, especially if you have a retail store. And here's the thing about it. The business loss wasn't equal. It wasn't like all business lost 1/5. A big part of that revenue loss was businesses that was not considered essential, or businesses didn't have the ability to work at home, or solo entrepreneurs who had a storefront, like a retail store, if you were selling clothing and maybe you couldn't pivot to go online. But we all have experienced it. We all have maybe had a friend who've experienced it. So business loss is that where I was talking about, it's the loss of the actual revenue that you're grieving. It's the loss of contributing to your community. Maybe you had employees. It's all of that. So this is where the pandemic has hit us. And before the pandemic, there really wasn't a lot of work, and there really isn't a lot of studies shown about the impact of grief and loss on solo entrepreneurs or business owners. There's a lot of study about how business owners, their skills, and their leadership styles. But as leaders and as business owners, when we have a loss, we know how to deal with it, maybe if it's financial, but we never really think, and there's not a lot of planning about how grief impacts us in our business. It's not two things that sometimes come together. So there is a cost to grief. 51 billion is lost in Canada per year due to mental health care costs resulting from lost productivity, sick days, and other health issues. I put the statistics in because there isn't a specific research about grief and loss in Canada, but it's important to note that if Canada is losing $51 billion a year due to healthcare costs resulting from sick days and mental health days, a big part of this is grief. All right. So mental health is just, they lump that all in about why people are taking time off. It's because of mental health, and that relates to being not well. So it's 51 billion. I'm sure when there's another study that comes up, because this was done a few years ago, it will be higher. In the US, there was a little bit more study that was done, but this was back in 2003, where there was a $75 billion loss. 75 billion US, I should say, loss for grief when they did the study. And the thing that was most interesting that I found from all the studies, there was a 90% increase in physical injuries due to reduced concentration following a loss after a 6 months period. So what that basically means, let's say you're a production worker, or you're working in a kitchen, you're a baker, you have a 90%, you have a greater chance of having a physical injury after a loss because you're not concentrating. So what happens is that, in a company, I have experienced a loss. They gave me some bereavement days. I'm off for 3 or 4 days. Maybe I take a week. If I'm lucky with my company, I can take a month off work combined with bereavement leave, sick leave, etc. But when I come back to work, if I'm working in something that requires deep concentration, there is a chance that I have a greater chance of having a physical injury. There's a 70% average increase in the new use of alcohol and other substances. Basically, we're looking for ways of coping. right? And there's a lot of studies that have shown right now during that pandemic that globally and in Canada, that this has increased. There's an increase of individuals using alcohol, not because they've agreed, but there's just an increase in alcohol. There's an increase in mental health issues. And I was watching a news story where Mothers Against Drunk Drivers say after a long time, there's now an increase in accidents where people are driving while they're intoxicated during the pandemic. So police are saying they're stopping more and more people who were drinking and driving. So they're relating that now to the direct impact of the stress of being in the pandemic. Grief comes to work. It doesn't stay at the front door. When you put that sign that says open or you turn on your computer, it doesn't go away. You find ways to manage it. You find ways to cope with it. But what it looks like is that when it comes to work, it looks like you're more absent from work. There's more illness. If you have a team, there could be more turnover, more poor communication between coworkers. So if one person is grieving and you are not understanding their experience, maybe they're not sharing, or just the culture that you're in at work is not a place where you can share, people can clash because sometimes you keep hearing, oh, it's time to get over it. You're in a better place. They're in a better place. If you're the 10,000 person who has said that to that person, that might be their trigger and they might just snap at you. And that snapping is not them being oversensitive. It's that their heart's broken. Sometimes there's a decrease in confidence, an inability to set limits and say no, a flatness and a lack of creativity. And these are really in part of the griever. The griever feels, I don't have the energy to fight with this coworker. I don't have the energy now to stand up for myself. And then if you layer that on them being a woman, a minority, a woman of color, this is going to be even more impact that they're not feeling confidence. And they might be feeling this sense of flatness. I don't have the energy. I don't want to be involved. And that all impacts. And that's what grief looks like when they come to work. I know I've given you a lot of information, so I want to take a breath. Let's take a breath in for everyone. And just want to pause right here if you have any questions before I continue, because I just, I'm feeling that maybe it's a lot of information. This be a good time before I go on.
If I'll just wait to see if there's any questions in the chat, but I just want to say, you know what, this makes me think that this is so useful. I'm feeling what you're telling us, because it makes us create space for others, right? And this is about empathy, I think, as well, and recognizing, I mean, what you're doing has already changed perhaps, how I could look at my own family, that we're all going through grief in a different way in the same household and in a workplace. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Compound that by how many people you deal with virtually. So all of those other social cues are lost, right? And that can really lead to deteriorated relationships very quickly if we're not aware and mindful of it. So thank you for that. I just would like to thank you.
That's great, because we don't teach grief literacy, right? Yeah. It's not something, there's not a class that we have at school. And a lot of times grief is just something that we shove under the table. In my interpretation, there's no research about it, but my experience is that, and this is according to Ophelia, is that we don't talk about grief because we're scared of death. Right?
That's probably on the mark. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, if there's no questions, I'll just continue on. So as we're experiencing all of this thing during the pandemic, life is still happening to us, right? We still have to work at home. We still have children to care for. We still have to pay our mortgage. We still have our car payments to pay. If you were able to still have employees, you still have to worry about payroll. Life is still happening. And even those joyous moments are happening. There are babies that are still being born. Children are still, when the playgrounds are open, they still want to go outside. Pictures are still happening. milk is still spilling on your floor. You're still having pets that pee on the floor, all of those things and those stresses that are still happening. And then we're dealing with this other layer. So I want to celebrate you that you're here today for this, to learn, and to applaud you for being here and to making it through. So what's next? As you learned all of this information, it's important to make a plan. So that's going to be the other, coming up to the other half of this workshop. It's talking about how to make a plan. And the skills that make us a successful entrepreneur sometimes can hinder us when we are grieving. And what I mean by that is that the skills that we have as an entrepreneur, we are innovative, we're visionary, we're go-getters, we want to get things done, and that's really great. But to move through grief, it's a little slower pace. It's allowing it to flow. It's giving that person the permission to have those spaces. It's not rushing it. It's not looking for an end point. It's not having, sometimes it's not, the plan is, I will just sit here with you. I will just be here with you. And sometimes as entrepreneur, we want to fix things, we want to solve it, because that's why we're in business. We see a problem, we have a solution, we market it, and we're business successful. And that's fine, because that's what business is about. But grief is different. And on the other side, because we don't talk about grief, and grief is not, we don't increase our literacy around grief, we don't have a plan. But we have plans for other businesses, things that happen, a theft prevention plan, or emergency response plan, a wellness plan. But as I said, we don't have a grief plan because it's not part of our grief or business literacy. We also have other policies: harassment, anti-racism, violence in the workplace. It's really important to have a grief response plan. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be simple and specific based on your business needs. The first step in having a business plan is understanding the 5 stages of grief. Kubler-Ross is the one that first brought this up. And her studies was how people were experiencing grief and loss and how they are going through change and transition. So the first stage is the blue box: denial. This didn't happen. So in a business sense, it was, no, this is not happening to me. Things are going to change. We're going to reopen soon. It's only going to be 2 weeks and we're all going to be back to work. That was my thought. No, school's going to open. School's going to open. School's going to open. Daycare will open. Daycare. I was in denial. And then I went to anger, which is the pink box. And I was pissed. What do you mean I have to be stuck at home with my family? I love them, but this is too much. And I was angry because my business had changed. I had worked so hard to make all these connections, and my partnership was done because the business doors were closed. The clients that I was working with one-on-one, the groups that I had set up, the partnership that I had built for going on 3 to 5 years, and I've got myself into this place where this was what I want to do, my passion. I was angry that I couldn't serve my clients or be there for them because the framework at that time was all personal touch. It was all having grief groups because this is what the community needed. And I found a niche market and I was building that. And when the pandemic hit and things closed, any personal touch business, it was gone. So in the course of a couple of days, I had no business, because those clients that I was marketing to, they wanted to still work with me, but they wanted it in a personal way. And then I got really sad. I didn't really do anything. I was depressed because my business had changed and I was still, and doesn't mean that you're not going back and forth. It's not a smooth and just transition. You're going to be back to denial and back to anger because this is all happening again because we're in our 3rd lockdown, right? And then you get into bargaining. okay, if, if I do this, then this will happen. If I, and you bark, and then the final stage of grief is acceptance. It's not saying that I'm accepting I'm not doing anything, but this is at this stage we find meaning. And it's taken me a good year with dealing with the pandemic, that right now in my third lockdown, what I've learned from the first lockdown, I've applied it. I have developed strategies. I have my own grief process, and it's a little bit easier for me as I move through these phases. So understanding the basic concept of how people and a business move through grief and loss, it's one of the most important steps for you to take as a business owner. Because without improving your grief literacy, it's really kind of challenging to have a plan. Because as you improve your literacy, you can share that with the people that you work with or your partners. Step 2, prioritize self-care. This is one of the most important things. Grief is tiring. It's mentally exhausting. Just looking and remembering about those stages, it sounds like it's 5 stages, but there's 50 different emotions that you're feeling at the same time. And one of the things that grief does, you can feel 2 opposing emotion at the same time. I can be angry and I can be happy. I can feel sad and feel happy at the same time. I'm sad that my mom's gone, but I'm happy that I have these memories with her. And sometimes we think, well, I can't feel both. Yes, you can. It's exhausting. And the way through grief and loss is prioritizing your self-care. Why? Because grief is transforming you, whether you wanted to or not. So as our business is being transformed in some ways, even though it might not be directly impacted, but in some ways your business must have been impacted during this experience. So even though your doors weren't permanently closed, we had to stay at home. We had stay at home orders. We had to get computers or faster internet. We had to buy Zoom backdrops. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't think of. Getting lighting, making sure you had a computer. Maybe you didn't have a laptop and you have to buy a laptop. So how do you shut out the noise? Is finding ways to have self-care. And self-care can look so different. It's getting outside, finding something to laugh at. You have children, they bring you joy, meditation, mindfulness. The small moments when the cafes was open, we went out, we all rushed to be in the cafe, but finding ways to just reconnect to yourself. Self-care is not being selfish. Self-care is essential for you to move through any form of grief and loss. Step 3, create a grief recovery roadmap plan. And I'm just going to put it here and we'll go through it. So the roadmap stands for R, is to recognize the unique signs of grief in your business. So what are some things that, if you're a solo business entrepreneur, as I talked about all of this, what are some unique signs that you're experiencing right now? If you have work colleagues or employees, what are some of the unique signs? Do you have an employee that's been missing work a lot and that wasn't their normal behavior? Maybe they're grieving. Right? So that's the first thing. If we can't recognize that we are grieving or a business is going through a grieving period, then it's really difficult to make a plan. So in order to do anything, we need to recognize that something is happening. And then we have to own our response, both as a griever and a business owner. It's saying, this is my business. As an individual, I'm grieving, or as an individual, my business is going through this grief and loss period. I'm going to own it, because when we own something, we master it and we can make a plan because it's ours and we're contributing to it. So that's important, because sometimes people say, yeah, I recognize it, but oh, they're going to get help next door, or they're going to go to a counselor, they have a church or whatever. That might not be true. It's owning it, because if you have people coming into your work, or you're coming into work, even though you're a business owner, you're also a co-worker of yourself and a person in that business. So it's recognizing my grief is coming to work. I need to own and how I manage this. And the A is for access, accessing resources and supports that can help you individually and with your businesses. What do I need? We are filled with a wonderful community here. We can of a lot of various business owners. Is it something that you can look and see, what do I need? How do I help this person? And so it's accessing those resources. Once you have that and you say, I need a plan, it's deciding to be detailed about your plan. And I'd like to say it's as detailed as going to be who is going to buy that condolences card. Who's going to send out the flowers if somebody dies? Where are you going to get that flower from? Like what flower shop are you going to use? Do you have a relationship with them? Because when you're in crisis, if an employee has a tragic event and they've lost a family member that has died, we're all overwhelmed. We may know that person, but we love our coworker, and that's the chaotic. And it can be simple as you having a file box and you have condolences card already there. You already have sick cards, you already have birthday cards. And if it's just you, of course, it's going to be you that send it out. But if you're a little bit of a larger business, you can decide that this is going to be the wellness coordinator. And if it's the wellness coordinator that's having a grief, it's going to be something else, because it's also creating a legacy for your business. If you're not there on vacation, somebody can go to that binder and say, okay, this is what I need to do. And the most important part is you map it out. So that creates a roadmap. And map it out. You set some timelines. Who will do what? When will it be done? You have a list of resources in your community, and you map it out that's specific to your business.
Ophelia, maybe I'll ask a question here, talking
Sure.
about the map you just mentioned on the previous page. I'm assuming that this plan doesn't have to be pages and pages long. It could literally be a one-page plan, or do you see plans that are much longer?
It really depends on the business. It can literally be a 1 or 2 pager plan. Some places that I've worked with, they've incorporated in their wellness plan. It's part of their wellness plan. And they look at when the person's coming back to work, how you're going to manage them and how you're going to work with them. So it really depends on the business. But for a solo entrepreneur, this can be something really simple. And maybe the list of resources is just a printout of the crisis center or a list of places that you just get online. So it can be really simple. Step 4, find time to be mindful throughout your day. If you're dealing with grief and loss, and if somebody is dealing, it's finding that time where it's actually that you're mindful, it's slowing things down. Maybe it's when we all have to wash our hands now more and more. I say this is the best time to be mindful. I hear my little niece in the bathroom when she's washing her hands, and they teach her at school to sing happy birthday twice. So I started to do that, and it's really mindful because you're focusing on one thing and you're giving your brain a rest. That's in the simplest form what mindfulness is. Focusing on one activity to pause, to give your brain an opportunity to rest. Because as you see, your brain is over processing so many things. And step 5, if you really need some help, you can reach out for support. You do not have to do this alone. You can connect to me via my website, and I have a complimentary info planning session that I would love to offer you. And if it's not me, find someone that you can reach out to that can help you with this, a wellness coordinator, someone in a group, or just get together as colleagues and just make a plan. Because do not wait till the grief event happens before you are overwhelmed. So this is my time for questions, if there are any questions here.
So I want to thank you, Ophelia. We are going to stop the recording at this point, and we are going to go into our question period. So if you're joining us on YouTube, thank you much for joining us, and please do reach out to Ophelia for further resources.